Little George, he was a friend of mine back in 1959 or 1960, right around that era. Called him Little George because he was little. He was about a foot and a half shorter than any of the rest of us at that age. But he was an interesting little guy, and he was always out ready to go for a new challenge. One winter, we'd had a good snowfall, and a group of us decided we would head back behind our house on the hill and go back to the canyon, and where there was a fairly good hill back there. You could go down on sleds, and we went back there, and it was good. We built us a big fire, and we had a great time for a while, and then we thought, well, you know what? I think we need to get that toboggan out here. Now, a toboggan is not an ordinary sled. This one held 8 people. Our toboggan held 8 people if you squeezed them in real tight, and especially us kids, we could get 8 people on there. But anyway, we got that and waxed up the bottom a little bit with some wax we had, and now the toboggan, it's only about this thick. It's about 18 inches wide maybe, and it was about 8 foot long actually. And at the front it curled up and around like that, and that was where the lead guy or woman or girl would sit there. So they gathered up a bunch of volunteers that wanted to go down on that toboggan, and this time, instead of going down the normal hill that we used, they decided they was going to go way up higher, probably another 100 feet higher, and go down there with that toboggan. They were feeling pretty courageous, and so they all started walking up there. Now, the only problem with going higher was when you reached the spot where we usually stood and there was a fire, there was a drop-off probably, I don't know, almost 3 feet high. So if you came off the top upper hill, you had to go over that drop-off, and that left you airborne probably for 30 feet before you hit. And so that was a real challenge when you did that, because when you did hit that drop-off, you were flying pretty good. So they all went up there, and I was watching from the fire. I decided not to volunteer for this little episode, and they all got on their Little George. He's in the front because his knees didn't spread apart enough to let anybody get between his knees, but you had to do that. You had to have somebody between your knees to get everybody on there. So you sat down, started in the back, and you'd sit down, and then someone would squeeze in between your knees and sit down and just work your way up until you got to the front. And then the front guy didn't have to spread his knees. And that's where Little George was all the time when we rode that toboggan. So they had it all loaded up. I can't remember. There might have been, I think there was probably 6 guys and a couple girls in there. Girls were pretty tough back then, you know. So they said, "You guys all ready?" And yep, here they come. And they come scooting down that hill and picking up speed. And they zoomed by me. When they went off that ledge, I was standing there, and they were eye level. They were flying down that hill, and they shot off of that ledge, and you could hear the screams and the yells. Oh, they were having such a great time. And they went, and when they hit about 30 feet further down the hill, well, that was the hard part when you hit, because you lose your grip, you lose your balance, and everyone started falling off. There was kids going everywhere, upside down, and arms flailing and legs flailing and yelling and screaming and laughing, and it was quite a mess. And then by the time the toboggan got to the bottom of the hill, well, there was only 2 kids left on it, and it didn't slow down this time. We'd waxed her up way dang good, and she was flying at the bottom of the hill. Usually it stopped pretty quick, but not this time. It zoomed out there past the normal stopping area, went over an irrigation ditch, and then kept on going, and those 2 kids were trying to stop it, but they couldn't stop it. And there was a barbed wire fence out there, quite a ways. Nobody had ever gone under that barbed wire fence until that day. And that toboggan scooted under that fence, just wiped the slate clean from those kids. And when that barbed wire hit them, it just cleaned the sled off just like that, and they were left hanging up in the fence. And a little further, the sled stopped. Oh, there was so much yelling down there and laughing and carrying on, and finally everybody got together and started walking back up the hill, and I was watching them, and they were limping, some of them holding their shoulders, some of them holding their head a little bit, and when they got to the top, they were all still having fun, of course, they were kids, and there was blood too from the 2 that were on the fence, and torn clothes. They ripped their clothes up pretty good, but it was still a funny thing, and we were just having a good time because everybody was just doing good. Everybody was nobody was hurt at all. But well, maybe little George. Little George was kind of wandering around with his eyes were a little vacant, and he was walking kind of in big circles and muttering to himself. And someone said maybe he's got a concussion, and then I thought, you might be right, because I remembered watching him after that sled hit after the jump, and I remember seeing him going about 8-10 feet down the hill on his head, upside down, just only his head on the ground. Funniest thing I ever saw. But anyway, we thought, he might have got a little concussion. We really didn't know what concussion was, but we'd heard it talked about, so we thought, well, yeah, he's got a little concussion, but he'll be all right. And so, we all sat around the fire, and little George, he was sitting around the fire too. But then we were talking and just having a good time warming up, because we were pretty cold. And someone looked up and said, "Hey, where's little George going anyway?" And we looked, and he was about 200 yards away out there just walking around. And we thought, well, he's our friend. We took care of our friend, so we thought we better check on him. So one of us jumped up and walked out there and gently guided him back, to the fire, and set him down there. And he sat there for quite a while and really entertained us because of the things he was muttering and saying. He said some weird things there, and his eyes were still vacant, but we all laughed and thought it was just a great time, little George. And that's how it ended. We went back to the house and stood by the fireplace after that. And little George, he in a couple weeks, he was just back to normal. There was nothing too wrong with him, I don't think, not really noticeable anyway. But that was a great time. I miss those friends, I miss them a lot, and I miss those days and those fun days and back there when we were kids. It was just wonderful. I wish I could go back.